Can sleight of mouth be used to conversationally hypnotize people? That was the topic of this comment. Sleight of mouth is used to establish new beliefs, can be used in conversational hypnosis. We are going to demystify those terms, what they mean, and where is the link between both. The traditional perception people have, especially with Hollywood movies and books in general, of hypnosis is about the state the subject is into. We usually talk about hypnosis or anything that has to relate to hypnotizing people when we see at least one person, eyes closed, head down, like this. Or we usually judge if something is hypnotic or not by the responsiveness and the almost submissiveness of the subject to the hypnotist or anyone using persuasion or influence. That is just a very Hollywoodized version of what hypnosis is, because anything that goes below the state of consciousness can be referred to as hypnotic. In that sense, sleight of mouth can definitely be recognized as being hypnotic. But now, if we drift more toward the literature, what do books say about conversational hypnosis or speaking like Milton Erickson and anyone like that? It is about turning your language into more permissive phrases, adding more adjectives like easily, naturally, rapidly. So you will rapidly go into a trance, you will easily lose all your resistance. It is quite often about using permissive language like that. You might go into a trance, someday eventually you could find a solution to your problems. That is usually what most people learn when they want to look for some conversational hypnosis. Or it may be about embedded commands. How do you enumerate the state you want them to be into? The most traditional way is, okay, they are awake, you want to make them close their eyes and go into a trance. So you study the language, the embedded commands of go into a trance, relax now, get down all your limitations, drift into more comfort. All of those are simple embedded commands that are aimed at changing the state the person is into. And as I said, in the modern Hollywood kind of thinking, it is about making them drop down, relax, and like submissive to all the things the hypnotist says. It is just one very small way of using hypnosis. There are many other ways, and there is a big problem with only studying hypnotic language, which is where your question comes into play and is a very interesting one to that extent, because quite often we see hypnotherapists, newbies hypnotherapists who become pretty clever and pretty articulate in formulating a suggestion. So they have understood that instead of saying go into a trance now, it might be better if they say, oh, you might start to close your eyes and maybe you will sense some sense of relief as you breathe out all the oxygen and you breathe in again. That is a more permissive and more elegant way of getting someone to drift into another state of consciousness. So hypnotherapists and NLP coaches of all sorts tend to become pretty good at articulating a good hypnotic suggestion, but they have trouble to figure out which suggestion is the best one from all the possible options in their head. To put that into more clarified structure, sleight of mouth, if I had to make an outrageous generalization about it, sleight of mouth is about what to say. Conversational hypnosis, in the way it is portrayed in modern literature, is about how to say it. You may think it is great to know how to articulate a hypnotic suggestion, to know how to use conversational postulates, to know that quotes are more effective than direct language, to know how to use cause and effect language. All of those, yeah, but in the end, what do you really try to say? And how do you adapt what you say to the person you are listening to? That is where sleight of mouth, in my opinion, is a more important and more interesting tool to learn from. The sleight of mouth model, as you may know, starts with the inference or the belief the client, the customer, the patient, the subject makes during a conversation. You only base your sentence on what the client or the person said, which comes in those two squares in the middle in the initial initial model, and based on what they said, then you formulate an idea that will reframe their limiting belief. Now, if on top of that you can add a few permissive language, or you can use a quote instead of you yourself saying it, that is appealing more to conversational hypnosis, and that is great. In the end, if you have both, that is great. But quite often I have met people who understood how to use quotes, how to quote an argument, how to use a more permissive embedded command, but they don't really know, yeah, but what should I reply to this patient, to this subject, to this limiting belief? They haven't learned to identify what to say before studying how to say it, which comes down to sleight of mouth. And obviously, any competent coach or therapist down the road has some intuition about what to reply to this limiting belief, what to say to this limitation. So they kind of understand sleight of mouth from an intuitive level because of just mere experience or having been exposed to a master they learned with, for example. But they may have trouble to explain consciously what they do. And that is where this model, in my opinion, came as a brilliant invention, because it is about, yeah, but what is the mental process that happens before you know what to say? This is how masters of communication formulate their argument. They go into one of those directions, and that is how they make a decision about what to say next. Now, if you know hypnosis, you can present your message in a more agreeable way for the conscious mind of the person listening to you. You can prevent resistance. You want to make their mind drift to a consequence pattern, for example, what will happen in the future, or what might not happen in the future. But if you say that brutally in their face, you might get resistance. That's where conversational hypnosis comes into play. Instead of brutally saying, no, you're wrong because this is the right thing, you will say, you know, my friend, someday a wise person told me that instead of forcing on this problem, your limiting belief, whatever, instead of forcing on this problem, this wise mentor told me that we could actually look at the future and notice how in this future, blah, 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 whatever you say, you have used the consequence pattern here, making their mind drift to the future thinking. However, you didn't brutally attack their belief. You kind of used a soft way of presenting the proposition. And when you combine both together, definitely you have the best tools ever to communicate and influence anyone, no matter what the topic of conversation is about. If you had to pick only one though, I would still go for sleight of mouth more than Milton model, conversational whatever, hypnotic whatever. I would still personally choose a sleight of mouth if you're really a beginner or intermediate and you try to select only one thing to focus on. I would definitely bet more on sleight of mouth, at least in the beginning, until you have a good grasp, a good oversight of how it works. And at some point, yes, you can elaborate on how could I say this, how could I formulate this suggestion so that the ears of my listener gets more appeased and don't try to fight back whenever I talk about something new. But as a conclusion, a more general answer to your question, your initial question, was if you really want to mix the general perspective of what sleight of mouth is and the general perspective from movies and whatever, or Milton Erickson, of what hypnosis is, one great thing I would say to ally both together is do use a sleight of mouth, but only with one outcome in mind. It is to use a sleight of mouth to reframe their reasons, the subject you want to hypnotize or coach or whatever, to use it to reframe their reasons to justify why they can't or should not go into a trance, or why it's not going to work for them. That is a pretty common objection for hypnotherapists when they have a new client coming and that client hasn't really been exposed yet to how hypnotherapy works and stuff like that. They may be a heavily left brain oriented and don't want to imagine it is possible to just let go and let the unconscious mind do its work. They think it is impossible, so they will argue with the hypnotist, or they may get into the trance, but since the hypnotist hasn't taken care of those limiting beliefs, the trance might not work at all and the client may be frustrated and never come back. If before trying to hypnotize somebody, before trying to make them go into a trance, you ask them what do they think of hypnosis, how do they think it can help them, and notice any limitations there. Like, well, I heard about it, but I'm not really quite sure it's gonna change me. Or like, I understand I should close my eyes, but I want to be completely disconnected. And that's not how hypnosis works. We don't completely disconnect people. So you want to take care of those assumptions they have about what the hypnotic trance is before you make them go into a trance. And to that extent, Sleight of Mouth is a great tool because you can take all the beliefs they have about it should work that way, I should feel great after 10 minutes like this. You take all those presuppositions and you reframe each of them one by one until they fully understand your way of thinking, you being the hypnotist, for example. They fully accept your model of the world with this. From there, if you hypnotize them, miracles will happen because you are on the same page. That is all for this video. If you want to study more of Sleight of Mouth, you have a small document down below in the description called the 7 Steps to Master Sleight of Mouth, where you will have a great description of each of the most important patterns you may want to use and how to use them and when to use them with whom. That is down below. It is for you, and I will see you soon in the next video. If you have other questions, please ask them in the comments.